Hi everyone, McBeard here, back with a non-podcast video. Yes, I have a Gwent video for you. I'm excited to bring it to you because Homecoming is coming. It's going to change the way we look at Gwent, so I think that this would be a great time to go through some of my very, very favorite decks, some of my really wacky brews, some of them, and some of my favorite decks as well for climbing the ladder, and kind of reminisce, not really reminisce, but appreciate that, Gwent is changing, which means that a lot of things that work right now won't work in the future. And I have some truly awesome concept decks that never really got to work, and it breaks my heart that I'll never really get to make some of these work. And over the next few videos, I'm going to show you my favorites. I have 3 decks for you to show you, but first I want to show you, just a little bit of stuff. I haven't been doing a lot of update videos. I haven't been doing a lot of deck guide videos, so you may not really know what's going on, but I just did a podcast. It's the last video upload on my channel. Paul Berja joined me for episode 93 of Commandos Horn Podcast, your weekly Gwent podcast. Gwent Open 7 is coming up on the 13th and the 14th, where I will be part of the broadcast team, joining you from Warsaw, Poland at CD Projekt Red Studios with Jagras, Impetuous Panda, and of course, Mega Mogwai and the whole crew down there, plus 8 pro players, which I'm sure you're familiar with. Finally, got the Homecoming Countdown. This is being recorded on September 22nd. It is a Saturday, so we have 31 days left before we are launching with Homecoming and Thronebreaker. But enough with that. Let's actually talk about some Gwent stuff, because I haven't made a Gwent video for you in a while, so check these decks out. Now, I really wanted to lead off with this one, King Eridan's Endless Fleet. I have been a huge fan of a Wild Hunt-based deck that was focused around the Wild Hunt Drakkar. This unit fascinated me, even in its older versions where it was an aura and it needed to stay on the board to actually provide its effect. I still saw so much great potential. The game eventually seemed to skew towards higher value bronzes. This card felt very left behind, but the snowballing effect that multiple Drakkars can have on the board is undeniable still. Unfortunately, I don't think this deck ever really had the support. It was a little too slow. A lot of the decks, the concept of the deck was to play a Drakkar in general at any given time. However you needed to play it. Sometimes you could play it with Eridan for tempo, or you had other ways of actually producing the Drakkar, but you play the Drakkar one way or another, and you use things like Alzur's Double Cross specifically to get a Necro Warrior out and put 2 more Drakkars in the deck. With 2 additional Drakkars in the deck, you can have a pretty insane long round 3. With 2 Necro Warriors applied, adding an additional 2 Drakkars into the deck, you are free to just play Drakkar every single turn in round 3 if you have control of the round. But you play something like Drakkar, and then you play the Warrior, and that's really the only thing you need to do to ultimately play the rest of this deck as fairly decent tempo to keep up, because the Drakkars support every other unit that you're playing that's a Wild Hunt, giving extra value to units that can already achieve fair value in the Wild Hunt Warrior. Plus, Navigators can help thin this out, Soldiers can help thin this out. The entire Bronze Core is all about thinning and ultimately leaving yourself with a deck full of Wild Hunt Drakkars one way or another. You're either playing a Drakkar, you're playing a Navigator to source a Drakkar, you're playing a Slizzard to source a Navigator or a Drakkar, or you're reconnaissancing out a Slizzard or Navigator or Drakkar. Ultimately, you can be double crossing out a Drakkar, and you can be playing Triss Telekinesis into a Reconnaissance into one of the ways to get a Drakkar. Finally, Eridan can produce his own Drakkar or his own Navigator. So you can see how, with just a little bit of extra Drakkars in the deck, this becomes a monstrous deck. And as support for this deck, of course, we are running fantastic Wild Hunt units like Caranthir, who is important because not only does he apply pressure in a long round, he is also a Wild Hunt unit, and he protects the Wild Hunt Drakkars on whatever row he is on, as he is 2 points higher than a Drakkar. This is really important for Igni. And of course, we have Triss Telekinesis, which sources any of the pieces you need to complete. Imler's Sabbath, it's a dirty trick, but he is a Wild Hunt unit that absolutely demands removal from your opponent, and you can just run away with the game with this card. It's unfortunate, but I honestly think that you can't really build a deck like this without Sabbath in it, but it is absolutely not a Sabbath abuse deck. It is a deck that makes Sabbath work even better than he currently does, with options to make him even higher pressure. But the real threat to your opponent is the long round and the Wild Hunter cards. So when you can play stuff like Imler's Sabbath and play things like the Crones, which provide you a lot of deck thinning and incredible reach in an early round, and you want to play it early, and even in a card like Nithril, which can provide a pretty huge swing at the beginning of the game, plus provide decent removal, much like Cleaver does or Yorveth does in Scoia'tael decks. Nithril is actually a fairly underrated card. Actually, I don't think it's an underrated card. I think that it just shines in this deck where the body can be boosted and the ping can remove almost anything Viper Witcher style. So you have all that. You have the Mandrake, which helps generally in the meta, but in a pinch can easily make Imler's Sabbath a game-winning, back-breaking play. And from there, it's all about laying the board out with Drakkar after Drakkar after Drakkar, and just running away with the score if your opponent can't really stop it. And your opponent slowly runs out of more and more ways to stop it as time goes on. I always felt like this deck was one piece away from truly being a fun and relatively competitive deck to play at high levels, but I personally couldn't ever get there. Maybe I can give it a try this week, as these are the final weeks that we are going to be playing Gwent as it stands. So I absolutely love King Eredin's Endless Fleet. The second deck I wanted to talk to you about is another deck that is near and dear to my heart. I call this deck the Legend of Threebor. It is discard Skellige with Bran and Ciri Dash, Johnny, Wolfsbane, Iris's Companions, a hearty discard core, which really has a lot of cool ways that can work. And the reason why I call it the Legend of Threebor is because my most viewed Gwent YouTube video by a large margin is a video called Threebor, in which I use Johnny and Ciri Dash to produce multiple Tibor Egebrox in a previous meta, but it actually created one of the most bonkers games you will ever see. And that deck, from that day forward, was a deck that I always treasured. But this deck is really about utilizing discard mechanics, the engines of the on-crate Longship, and of course the effects of multiple discards and thinning to produce a mighty Ciri Dash, and of course potentially a really strong Madman Lugos, getting extra value out of a 5th gold, being able to discard either Wolfsbane or Ciri Dash with Johnny, and of course Iris's Companions having a lot of extra discard potential, making it not even a bad card, as almost everything you can discard from your hand you're more or less okay with, but it has the extra added bonus effect of drawing you Ciri Dash and then immediately discarding it. I'm fine with that. You have Royal Decree to ultimately pull Ciri Dash, whatever point you get her at. You get her at, usually 18, 20, 22, but you can get really lucky with Johnny, with Svanriga, and of course having Bran get that original extra boost because of Bran's ability to also strengthen Ciri Dash by an additional 1. You end up getting Ciri Dash a lot of different times at 20 plus, with the Royal Decree being the final pull. Ultimately, you can also use Royal Decree to pull Ciri Dash out earlier. Not a lot of people run locks these days. Or weakening effects I don't think they usually feel wasted on Ciri Dash, so you're usually safe there. And on top of all of that, you have the usual dirty tricks. You have your Restore onto your Dimmen Pirate Captain, onto your Corsair, onto a machine, and in this case, it's the on-crate Longship. Now, I love the on-crate Longship since Corsairs were introduced, and even Heme Spear Maidens being able to pull them, but honestly, Corsairs do enough. Between Corsairs and the Dimmun Pirate Captain providing the Corsairs, you really just have the on-crate Longship, and you do your best to keep bringing them back, because even with 2 on the board, Bran is a devastating play. The Dimmun Pirate Captains go from being an 11-point play to being a 13, 15, 17-point play. If you ever get 3 of these on the board at once, your opponent has no hope in catching you. You are set up for a very favorable pass, or if this is around 3, just ultimate value from this card. It's an engine that is very much like a Mangonel, but didn't have a high pressure, abusive, stupid-esque deck like Morvan Reveal to really play the bully role with it. But this deck has actually a lot of long round potential and a lot of setup that can provide some really cool outcomes. It ultimately never felt all that competitive because of the overall tempo you lose. You also have a lot of choices here. You don't have to run a deck like this. I have 3 Raiders, Morkvarg, Wolfsbane, and Siri Dash. I only have 3 of these can be brand targets. Lugos usually throws a Raider, and of course I have a single Warmonger to get that last Raider out. Using Bran ultimately for Siri Dash, Morkvarg, sometimes Wolfsbane, but sometimes a Raider. It really depends on where Johnny is. Is he in the deck or in my hand? Where's Iris's Companions? Can Iris's Companions get me Johnny? There are a lot of fun ways that this deck can unfold, but ultimately you can secure some board states that are just backbreaking for the opponent. But with removal, Viper Witchers are out there. It was really hard to ultimately play this deck. Siri Dash never ended up being super competitive, but I've always loved Siri Dash, and this isn't the last time you're going to see Siri Dash in my videos of remembering my favorite decks, because I was a Siri Dash player and a Siri Nova player. But this is one of my favorite Dash decks, Legend of 3-board Discard Skellige. Finally, for this series, I want to cover a deck that I really like. This is just a really good deck, and I tend to use this deck for ladder because it's a world beater. It really does beat a lot of things that are meta, a lot of things that can kind of stomp you on the way up, greedy decks, stuff like that. This deck is a stomper in its own right, but also has a lot of easy techs that it can add in that barely impact the strength of the deck. Arguably, the deck is strongest when it has all these techs against really crappy meta stuff like Consume, Sabbath, huge boosted units, Nilfgaard hand buff, this new Olaf Siri Nova abuse deck that was popular after Challenger. This deck kind of handles all of those things while being a super strong deck that abuses a lot of the dirty stuff that Nilfgaard can already do. Now, I call this is a deck that harkens back to a player, Orphan Tears. You may know him from Wild Hunt 2. He played very well, got into the top 4. But additionally, this was a pretty strong deck here that Orphan Tears like to run Asira, as most Nilfgaard players do. Asira can absolutely fit into this place. Instead of running Vesemir Mentor and Black Blood, you might want to run a different card like Muzzle, or some other high value card like perhaps Rainfarn to abuse the spy a little bit. You can run those cards. I prefer to have Vesemir Mentor because Mandrake is pretty important on your way up the ladder to just absolutely obliterate Neckers and Imler's Sabbath. So I'm running Vesemir Mentor and Black Blood Mandrake, but you don't have to run Black Blood. I like the reach. I think that any Nilfgaard player thinks that this is probably a fine combo to include. Asira undoubtedly is one of the strongest cards in the game, as I knock things off in the background here. But sometimes I just feel like not playing that card. Of course, you can do nasty stuff with Asira, like shuffle your opponent's spy back in, or shuffle one of your thinning pieces back in case you had a brick or you had to play a Wyvern Scale Shield from your hand. The reason why I'm pretty sure a deck like this is never going to survive Homecoming is because a card like Wyvern Scale Shield really shows the design limitations of the game, in which every card has to be around 15 points to be competitive, but it also has to consider everything that can tutor it. So you have cards like Magni Division, Wyvern Scale Shield, and then you have Nilfgaardian Knight and Nilfgaard hand buff, which puts the 18+ point knight in the hand. That is a rough one, because where do you put the ceiling on a card like that? How do you balance it for the future? I think that a deck like this and a deck like Nilfgaard hand buff in general, which this ain't, but it does utilize really strong Nilfgaard stuff, like having a revealed knight or a revealed Cantarella in your hand, and then dropping massive spotters, massive Magni Divisions, the recruits grabbing spotters, or the Magni Divisions, of course, Joachim de Vet also pulling out a spotter, or anything really that Joachim pulls out late game is pretty devastating. You have your Vikavara medics to take care of great swords and other sort of graveyard dependent things that Skellige might be running. You have Peter Sargwenlev to take care of boosts. You have Igni to take care of long rounds where you can set things up. Also works very well with Cantarella. Also works very well in general with Black Blood because you can set up a Drowner play, or of course an Ekamara can provide you with a little bit of board structure. Forts for the offensive burn in case there's a unit that's going to cripple you late game or in a different round thanks to resilience. Forts also works very well with Vikovar, Medic, and Recruit. So Forts is one of the best cards. Generally, though, this deck is a huge, huge thinning deck. You want to play your Recruits to get your Magnies. You want to play your Magnies to get your Wyvern Scale Shields. You want to play your Recruits to get your Nilfgaardian Knights and your Spotters. You want your Alchemists in hand, usually because Alchemists are one of the worst cards to draw late, but also a card that doesn't really have a tutor. So you may use this. You want to use one early. Cynthia, also a great early game card. I mean, in a lot of this footage that you see here, I'm playing against AI, so obviously your opponent isn't going to have Geralt in his hand, but his or her hand, but may have Cantarella. So, you know, a 13-point play on Cynthia making an 18-point play plus the 3-point Golem for 21 points is a highly likely thing you can see. Plus, Cynthia reveals a great unit for your spotters. In addition to the thinning that you'll get in your round one, you will also put a lot of pressure on the opponent because you're making these massive plays with these Wyvern Scale Shields. Finally, if you get control of the round, your opponent might try some carryover stuff, or maybe you're on blue coin. That's where this deck really shines, I feel like, because you're able to continue to play into round two and thin and make some pretty huge plays, because spotters, generally you're okay playing spotters in round two to bleed your opponent, because otherwise your opponent can likely mess with the spotters. These are one of your most vulnerable units. They're huge boosted units, can be scorched, usually come out at the same strength in case you have a revealed Nilfgaardian Knight and Cantarella, or your opponent has a different card and you have to lose some value, but otherwise you take a hit to play around it. Generally, though, you can play them with a bit less fear if you're the one in control of the round and doing the bleeding. In addition, while you're doing all the thinning of the Wyvern Scale Shields and the Golems and, all of this stuff through Joachim and however you're pulling with Vesemir Mentor or perhaps even Forts, you want to do this because the more you thin, the more bombs these late game cards are. Usually you'll use Calvet to look for a recruit. Calvet is a great thinning tool. Use Calvet before Joachim. I don't know. It depends if you're playing Rainfart or not, but I like using Calvet when I have thinned everything I can, and now I'm looking for more thinning, so I don't look into Wyvern Scale Shield, Igni, or something like that. You thin as much as possible, and then you play Calvet. But then you go into round three with a couple of cards, and those cards are like Ciri Nova, Vilgefortz. Perhaps you have one Vikovar Medic for Vilgefortz. It's just nasty how many points you can put out at any given time with this round. It is a really strong deck that can compete with a lot of different things in the meta. Igni is a treasure in this deck. Again, with Calvet and with Cantarella, with Vilgefortz, you kind of know what's coming. You can set up crazy Vilgefortz Ignis, which allow you heroic passes when you know you have incredible reach. Your opponent will be put in a really tough spot where they'll just pass on you. You have the insane reach, perhaps on red coin, and then you're bleeding and you're making them pay for it. This deck just gets me so many wins going up the ladder and is pretty strong. You can get to Grandmaster with this deck. This is kind of the Orphan Tears blueprint of Tempo Nova Calvet, which I don't see a lot of, but I think is a supremely underrated deck. I love this deck. There you have it, folks. I'm going to be coming back with another video for you soon with 3 additional decks that I love, and I could probably do this all the way until we have some even more juicy stuff to talk about Homecoming. Check out the podcast, Commander's Torn episode 93 with Pal Berja. Like the video if you liked it. Subscribe if you want to see more Gwent content from your boy McBee. And until next time, I'll see you later. Good luck on the path.